Welcome, welcome, welcome. We'll start right off with our bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And we're going to get back into, thank you, going to go back into Noah. We are going to continue now with the Rashis. I do want to try, if Hashem will give me the strength and the ability to get through all the Rashis that we can. So here we are. We're in Noah for this coming week, and Noah is getting off the ark. He's in the process of getting off the ark. The flood is now behind him, and I'm going to ask you to mute if you are not, but if you have a question, of course, please unmute. Kol hachaya, all the animals, asher itcha, which are with you, mikol basar, of all flesh, ba'of, among birds, uvabhema, and among cattle, uvachol haromes ala aretz, and all creeping things that creep upon the earth. And here's a ketiv and a kri. It's pronounced as haitse, and not havtse. Now, it wouldn't have been pronounced or spelled that way anyway. It would have been hotzi, that with a yud between the tzaddik and the aleph, which is a causative form. So itach, in other words, so haitse will go out with you. Veshartsu and ba'aretz, and they shall swarm, or let them swarm on the earth. Ufaru urvu ala aretz, and may they be fruitful and multiply upon the land, upon the earth. So Rashi zeroes in on this ketiv. Ketiv means it's written one way, kri means it's read another way, and you just got an example. So he takes this word, right? Hotse. He says, Hotse ketiv, it's written as Hotse, Haitse kri, but you should read it as Haitse, right? Okay, so Haitse amur lahem. So, in other words, Haitse, emor lahem sheyetzu, okay? He says, say to them that they need to depart. Hotse im einam rutzim, but forcibly take them out, cause them to depart. Im einam rutzim latzeit, if they do not wish to depart. Hotziam ata, you need to make them go out. So, just perhaps something to think about as to the need to move out from the safety of the ark into the world itself, and whether there's any sort of literary connections that one might make in that distinction, and the need to mention that distinction. And perhaps, as I'm meditating about it, thinking about the relationship of human beings to the animals around us, whether there's any suggestions there. So, Vishartsu ba'aretz, and let them swarm in the earth. V'lo bateva. So it says there's as we would say, a diuk, an emphasis being placed here, and let them swarm in the earth. V'lo bateva, but not in the ark. That's not where they should be swarming. Magid, and this tells us she'af habehima v'ha'of, that even the cattle and the birds, ne'esru betashmish, were forbidden to engage in reproductive activity. So we know from the way the verses are stated that human beings were forbidden to engage in carnal relations. We learned that before, partially because, as you may recollect, when the world is in trouble, when the world is in agony, that isn't the time when we do something like that, and engage in that level of personal pleasure. But we didn't know about the animals, but we do know from here that this wasn't going to go on. And obviously, had it gone on, there would have been great trouble. The ark wouldn't have been able to sustain them. Yes.
It is about what you just said. The world would only really be in agony I mean, there are very few times the whole world would be in agony. It's all the time that parts of the world are in agony and
Right,
that other people can ignore that. So, like, obviously, if the world is being destroyed and there's a handful of people who are saved, they would be in agony because everybody else is being destroyed. And I would, but basically, that may be the only time the world, was in agony, and the world was just a handful of people.
right,
But
right.
but there, but like even okay, so during World War II
Yes,
or the aftermath of, like atomic bombs and stuff, not everybody was sharing the same feelings of agony. And so to say the world was
yes,
in agony, I mean it's so limited.
right. In other words, the circumstances you're saying are limited. Yes,
Right, right, to almost non-existent maybe.
yes, yes. I think that the takeaway could well be to be sensitive about it. That we have to try and recognize that we don't just live for ourselves, and that we shouldn't just be into our own selfish and personal, you know, enjoyments.
But I'm trying to figure out then when you ever would have relations, because there's always
Something.
agony and destruction existing
Right. Well,
somewhere.
there was more than that too. Golda, I see that you'd like to share something, please.
Yes, sex is more than just pleasure. There is comfort in that also. It
Correct.
is a closeness that when the whole world is falling apart, you require that closeness. And let's face it, that's kind of what the how the world has actually been working for pretty much ever.
Right, but you can certainly achieve that closeness without actually engaging in coitus, okay? I mean, you certainly can. And the issue is here procreation, right? It gets into a whole big subject as to the nature of the procreative act and to what degree it is a giving act and to what degree it is a selfish act. And under what circumstances that happens. But going back to the situation that Lauren is talking about, I mean, here we are talking about the earth itself, the entire, at least from the story point of view, that we're talking about the entire population surrounding. So there really hasn't been another situation where you can say that the entire world is, experiencing this kind of destruction. And obviously afterwards, there was a need to repopulate the world. And so we see that in fact comes about now. And it was only one of the reasons for not engaging it. I mean, there was a very practical level as well, which is, again, to what degree the ark could bear it. And also, there's also something else to think about in the fact that we are learning now that the entire population of the ark was was basically forbidden to procreate at that particular time, which obviously could have very practical reasons for it. So it's multifaceted. Should we go on? Let's proceed. Here we go. Let's see here. Okay. Vayetze Noach uvanav. So we see that Noah uvanav, Noah left and his sons, Veishto and his wife, Uneshevanav and his sons' wives, Ito with him. No Rashi on this. Kol hachaya, all the animals, kol haremis, all the creeping things, v'chol ha'of, and all the birds, kol romes al haaretz, everything that swarmed over the earth. Sorry, that creeps. Forgive me, it's not swarm. Sharetz is swarming. Romes is to creep. Okay, on the earth. The mishpachotehem, according to their species, their families, literally. Yatzu min hateva. They went out. They departed from the ark. Here we go. Le mishpachotehem, according to their species. Kiblu alehem. This is interesting, right? That they voluntarily accepted almanat lidabek beminan, I think is supposed to be this, that they would stick to their own kind, that they would not intermingle. So I think that there's a balance, right? That there is a beauty in diversity and the ability for that diversity to get along with one another, to be able to tolerate the differences, is a great, great lesson for human beings. And perhaps that's the ability to balance those two things. And of course, we know that distinction is an issue and in the Torah, that it starts off with that very thing about darkness and light, etc. But in this case, I feel that it's wanting us to sort of learn how to balance these things, that there can never be shalom, there can never be peace unless there's a willingness to be able to accept, tolerate, embrace difference. So just a thought there going on. Leave where they're on that. Okay. Vayiva Noach mizbeach Lashem, and Noah built an altar to Hashem, to God. Vayikach michol habehema haTorah, and now we're back into his taking from all the pure animals. Remember, he was told that there were animals. While the Torah here does not tell us which animals are considered pure animals, right? We know from what we are permitted to eat as Jews, which animals are considered pure. And essentially, they're the ungulates, right? And like sheep, cattle, and deer, species of deer. Umikol ha'of, and every species of pure bird, right? And again, so pure birds, v'ya'al olot b'mizbeach, and he offered up whole offerings on the altar. So specifically, and because we've moved through the Torah, we know that an olah is considered a whole offering. It is where essentially the entire animal, it isn't necessarily that the entire animal is placed on the altar, although here it might mean that. We know that in terms of the tradition given to the Jewish people, pretty much the entire animal was in fact placed on the altar. I believe the innards, I'm doing this from memory, so it may be faulty, may have been burned off the altar, that is the innards, and I know that the skin of the animal was given to the priests to pay them for having performed the service. But essentially, it also came to atone for the not performing positive commandments, for avoiding. That's essentially there. But there's a whole discussion as to whether or not prior to the giving of the Torah, where different offerings are mentioned specifically, like a thanksgiving, etc., whether prior to that time any sacrifice essentially was an olah. So let's take a look at the Rashi. Mikol habehema haTorah, from all the pure animals, right? Amar. So this is Noah thinking to himself. Lo tziva li hakadosh baruch hu, the Holy One, blessed be He, only commanded me lahachnis me'elu, from these pure animals, sheva, that the only reason he would have asked me to bring 7 of each of these animals, ela kadei lahakriv korban mehem, that the purpose must have been so as to take and offer up an offering from them. And this particular act at this particular time actually has great significance. I only recently, in Midrash Rabbah, where we are studying the Parshat Noach, and they mention this, is the significance of this, these sacrifices. And the idea, honestly, was that one was offering up oneself. That the idea of offering animal sacrifices was a way of dedicating yourself in this particular way. And again, there are many implications involved in such a performance. And we'll see what I think will shed light on what is happening here is that you'll see that it's directly connected to what is going to happen following, where essentially God states that he will never bring a flood again. And we're going to see that right away. So the statement that I read in Bereshit Rabbah had to do with the idea that this offering brought by Noah in some ways represented the Jewish people subsequently, and the sacrifices that the Israelites, in other words, the Kiddush Hashem, the martyrdom that the Jewish people would have to face in the future. And that's pretty deep stuff going on here. So I just started to understand or to be introduced to that particular element of the significance of his bringing an offering here. And of course, certainly, I think that the pshat, that is to say, that the initial response we might have here is Noah's offering thanks. In other words, there are statements elsewhere in discussing what this is how worthy was Noah of being saved as opposed to all the other people that lived in the world at the time. And that there's maybe some, could we call it, a certain level of survivor's guilt involved that Noah was trying to atone for. I mean, there's just a lot of interesting stuff to think about here, but let's keep going. All right, let me see if there's any more Rashi on this. I think, yeah, we're done. He just gives us references elsewhere where Rashi derived this comment. So let's keep going on. It's interesting, right? Vayarach Hashem et reach hanichoach. And Hashem smelled, I guess, right, this wonderful fragrance, this pleasing odor, this pleasing fragrance. In other words, this idea is so interesting, right? That if this comes out of a sense of gratitude, I feel, certainly these days especially, that developing a spirit of gratitude as human beings is so fundamental to any sense of joy that we might have at being alive. And that God recognized, as you might say, this sense of gratitude by which Noah was offering this up. Vayomer Hashem el libo, and Hashem said to himself, right? We're using very anthropomorphic language here, but regardless. Lo osif lekalel od, I shall not can ever again, right? Curse et ha'adama, the earth, ba'avur ha'adam, on account of man. And we know that from the moment that Adam ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, the ground was cursed. And we know that the ground was cursed for Cain as well. And of course, the flooding of the earth was also a curse, in that all life forms that were on the earth perished at that particular moment. Why? Why did he need to take this? Interesting. Ki yetzer lev, right? And I'm translating this word yetzer as impulses, right? Or the desire, right? Or the devisings, right? Ki yetzer lev, the impulses of the heart, ha'adam, of man, ra min hurav, are evil from his youth. We will see that Rashi is going to give us a little bit of an interesting interpretation of the min hurav, that there is this evil impulse within human beings, that every single human being has this dark side. Velo osif od lahakot et, okay, and I will never again destroy et kol chai, all of life, kasher asiti, as I did. So we can see that this is some very profound stuff that the Torah is trying to share with us as to the nature of life, and also perhaps a way in which to look at our own dark sides and deep and deal with them. And of course, my sense that part of our religious discipline involves exactly that confrontation of our dark sides and ways in which to find ways in which to turn it into something actually good, because there is the very ability to confront our dark sides actually can be a great way in which to grow spiritually. And I'm trying to think, there was another point that I thought I could make along with this, but that has escaped me, I'm afraid, at this particular moment. Yeah. Well, again, in some ways, this is the very purpose of living, of being able to accomplish this. And of course, sadly, there are terrible risks involved in the fact that human beings are created in this particular kind of way. Let's go do the Rashi on this, right? Let's see here. Okay, so we're actually into this page. Min urav, right? Min arav kativ. So there's no vav, min urav, right? They normally, to pronounce this word this way, we'd want to have a vav here between the ayin and the resh, but it says min arav kativ. And there's a word nin ar, right? To stir. In other words, latzet mima'e imo. In other words, from the moment that the fetus stirs, or the neonate stirs to come from the womb of its mother. In other words, it's such an elemental part of human nature, this dark side, natan bo yetzahara, or nitan bo yetzahara. Yetzahara is this element within us. It means the evil inclination. That's the way it's classically translated. And it is essentially what we'd call the dark side, right? Okay, the id, perhaps, if you dare use Freudian terminology. Lo osif, right? The lo osif. So this is mentioned twice, right here. Lo osif here, right? And in the very same sentence, so we go up here, there it is, lo osif. Right? It mentions it twice, the lo osif, twice. This is going to have interesting implications halachically as well. At any rate, kafal hadavar lishvuah. He repeats this statement that he would never again destroy the earth as an oath. It is by way of making an oath. Lishvuahu. Shekatuv. Okay, as we know elsewhere, it says, Asher nishbati me'avor me Noach, as I swore from going over, in other words, bringing about the waters of Noah, right? Referring to the flood in Isaiah. This is a quote from Isaiah, later Isaiah. And we never see here, right? Here in Genesis, there's never a statement that says, and God swore, right? Or Anishbati, I shall swear. It doesn't say it here. It says it in Isaiah so many centuries later, right? And yet we don't see an oath being taken. Ella zo shekafal davar. So we see that the issue that he repeated his words, the hishvuah, that is by way of making an oath, taking an oath. V'chein darshu chachamim b'mesechet Shvuot, and so our sages interpreted in the tractate Shavuot dealing with oaths, and the implication being that when we repeat what we say, or if we do something more than once, that's exactly the same thing, and of course it depends what we're talking about, that it has the implication of taking an oath. And this is something that we have to be careful about, because we know that one of the 10 Commandments is that God does not forgive someone who makes a false oath, that is something very, very serious to keep our word. And we'll stop here today. And with God's help, we will continue tomorrow. So, and in that next sentence, we're going to have a specification of what this oath is going to be about. Right? Other than beyond that, God will never destroy the world again with a flood. And we'll stop the share with this. And I'll stop the recording.